Homeless after college. I built a Quonset against a rock wall. What it became kept me alive. It's a strange thing to have your entire life summed up in a single piece of paper. For me, it was an eviction notice taped to the door of my dorm room, the official university letterhead looking crisp and almost cheerful against the cheap wood veneer. Graduation was over, the parties were done, and the real world had arrived, not with a bang, but with a formal, non-negotiable deadline. If you've ever felt that pit in your stomach, that feeling of a clock ticking down to zero with no safety net in sight, maybe this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button if you've ever had to build a future out of nothing, because we're going to talk about that. A lot. The air in the hallway was thick with the ghosts of the last 4 years. Stale pizza, cheap beer, the faint, lingering scent of frantic, all-night study sessions. Everyone else was gone. Their cars had been packed, their goodbyes said. I was the last one left, wandering the empty corridors like a forgotten relic. I had a degree in philosophy, a mountain of student debt that felt like a physical weight on my shoulders, and exactly $217 to my name. My parents had passed away when I was a teenager, and the aunt who took me in had her own family, her own struggles. There was no childhood bedroom to return to, no welcoming couch to crash on. There was just this door, this notice, and the suffocating silence of the empty building. I sat on my stripped mattress, the plastic crinkling beneath me, and I tried to make a plan. The plan was short. It consisted of selling my textbooks for a fraction of what I paid, maybe getting another $50. After that, it was a question mark the size of the sky. I scrolled through job listings on my phone, the screen a cruel blue light in the dim room. Entry-level position, requires 3 to 5 years of experience. It was a joke I was no longer in the mood for. I had applied for over 100 jobs in the last 3 months. I'd gotten 2 interviews and 0 offers. The world, it seemed, was not in desperate need of a newly minted philosopher. I felt a familiar cold dread creeping up my spine. The same one I'd felt standing at my parents' funeral. The same one that whispered to me in the dark when I first moved into my aunt's crowded house. It was the feeling of being fundamentally untethered, a ship without an anchor, drifting toward something sharp and final. That was when the email arrived. It didn't have a flashy subject line, just, "Regarding the estate of Arthur Vance." I almost deleted it. I get spam emails all the time, preying on the desperate. But Arthur Vance, that was my grandfather's name. I hadn't heard it spoken in over a decade. He was a ghost, a myth in our family. My mother's father. The story I'd always been told was simple and sad. He'd walked out on my grandmother and my mom when my mom was just a little girl. He sent a few postcards from somewhere out west, then nothing. A black hole in our family tree. I clicked it open. The email was from a law firm in a town I'd never heard of, Stone Creek, Colorado. It was brief, formal, and utterly baffling. It stated that my grandfather, Arthur, had passed away 3 months prior. It said that as his last known living descendant, I was the sole heir to his estate. The word estate conjured images of sprawling mansions and trust funds, the kind of thing you see in movies. I almost laughed. This had to be a scam. A cruel, elaborate joke tailored to my exact desperation. But there was a name and a phone number for a Ms. Evelyn Albright, attorney at law. My hands were shaking, but I dialed the number. A calm, measured voice answered on the second ring. "Albright Law." I explained who I was, my voice cracking. Ms. Albright didn't sound surprised. "Ah, Mr. Vance. Leo, is it? I've been trying to reach you. The university records were a bit outdated. Her voice was professional, but not unkind. It was the voice of someone who delivered life-altering news on a regular basis. I'm sorry to be the one to inform you of your grandfather's passing. I didn't know him, I stammered. I thought he was gone, a long time ago. There was a pause. I see, she said, and in those two words, I felt a flicker of something, not pity, but understanding. Well, his affairs were not complex. He didn't have much in the way of liquid assets. In fact, he had almost nothing. But he did own a piece of property, 5 acres just outside of town. It's yours now, free and clear. The deed has been transferred. 5 acres. The words hung in the air. It wasn't a mansion, it wasn't a trust fund, but it was something. It was land, it was a place. What kind of property? I asked, my heart starting to pound a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Is there a house? There was, she said, her tone careful. A small cabin. I'm told it burned down about 20 years ago. The land itself is, well, it's quite rugged. Mostly rock and scrub pine. It's bordered on one side by a significant granite cliff face. It's not considered prime real estate, Mr. Vance. The town has it valued at next to nothing for tax purposes. Burned down. Rugged. Next to nothing. The hope that had flared in my chest sputtered, but it didn't die out completely. It was still a place. It was mine. There is one other thing, she added. A complication. Of course there was. A development corporation, High Ridge Ventures, has been acquiring land in that area for years. They intend to build a luxury resort. Your grandfather's parcel is the last private holding on that entire mountain. They've made offers for years. He always refused. They have a standing offer of $20,000 for the deed. $20,000. The number was so large it seemed fake. It was a fortune. It was the answer to every single one of my problems. It was a security deposit on an apartment, a used car, food for a year. It was a chance to breathe. It was a get-out-of-jail-free card. They've been persistent, Ms. Albright continued, her voice lowering slightly. Your grandfather felt they were not operating in good faith. He believed they were trying to force him out. The offer is on the table, Leo. All you have to do is sign, and the money is yours. Given your circumstances, which I can only guess at, it might be the most sensible option. Sensible. Yes, it was sensible. Take the money and run. Start a new life, a normal life. Forget the ghost of a grandfather I never knew. Forget the worthless patch of rock and pine. But something held me back. A flicker of defiance. The man had held out for decades. He refused to sell. Why? What was he protecting? Or, I asked. Or what? Or you can keep it, she said simply. It's your land. I hung up the phone, my mind reeling. The eviction notice on the door seemed to mock me. $20,000. The words echoed in my head. It was an escape, but escape to where? To another anonymous apartment, another city where I knew no one, to start from a different kind of zero? I looked at my meager possessions, a duffel bag of clothes, a box of books, and a philosophy degree. I had nothing to lose. And suddenly I had 5 acres of rock and pine to my name. I sold the textbooks. It got me $62. I sold my laptop for another $100. I bought a one-way bus ticket to Stone Creek, Colorado. The journey was a blur of greasy spoon diners and the endless hypnotic hum of the highway. For 3 days, I watched America scroll past my window, the flat, sun-baked plains of the Midwest giving way to the slow, majestic rise of the Rockies. With every mile, the institutional gray of my university life faded, replaced by the deep greens and blues of the open country. I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't moving toward a place someone else had chosen for me. I was moving toward something that was mine, however broken or worthless it might be. I arrived in Stone Creek on a crisp autumn morning. The bus hissed to a stop in front of a small general store that looked like it hadn't changed since the 1950s. The air was thin and sharp, smelling of pine needles and cold stone. The town was nestled in a narrow valley, hemmed in on all sides by towering, jagged peaks. It was smaller than I'd imagined, just a single main street with a handful of wooden storefronts. Ms. Albright's office was above the hardware store. The stairs creaked under my weight. She was older than her voice had suggested, with sharp, intelligent eyes and gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. She looked me up and down, taking in my worn-out jeans and the heavy duffel bag slung over my shoulder. There was no judgment in her gaze, only a quiet assessment. "Mr. Vance," she said, gesturing to a worn leather chair. "You made it." "Leo," I said, dropping my bag. "Please." She gave a curt nod. "Leo, I have the paperwork for you, the deed, the tax assessment, and this." She slid a thick envelope across her desk. It had the High Ridge Ventures logo embossed in the corner. "Their official offer. As I said, 20,000. They're eager to close. They called me twice yesterday." I stared at the envelope. It felt heavy, like it was filled with more than just paper. It was a choice, a clean break. "Before you decide," she said, leaning forward, "I think you should see the land for yourself. It's about a 5-mile walk up the old logging road east of town. Can't miss it. There's a rusted gate with the name Vance barely visible on it." She handed me a folded, hand-drawn map. "One more thing. Your grandfather left a safe deposit box at the local bank. The key was with his personal effects. The contents are legally yours." She passed a small, tarnished brass key across the desk. "I don't know what's in it. He was a very private man." A key, a map, a choice. My life had suddenly become a collection of mysterious objects. I thanked her, my voice hoarse. I told her I would see the land before I made any decisions. She just nodded again, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. Respect, maybe. Or perhaps she just thought I was a fool. The walk out of town was steep. The pavement gave way to gravel, and the gravel gave way to a deeply rutted dirt road that climbed steadily into the mountains. The sun was warm on my back, but the air held the promise of a coming winter. The higher I climbed, the more the world opened up. The valley below became a green and brown patchwork, and the sky seemed vast and impossibly blue. I felt small, insignificant, but in a good way. The world was huge, and my problems, which had felt all-encompassing in that dorm room, seemed to shrink with every step. After an hour of walking, I saw it. A rusted, leaning gate, half swallowed by overgrown bushes. A faded, peeling piece of wood was wired to it. I had to get close to read the faint, hand-painted letters. V-A-N-C-E. I pushed the gate. It shrieked in protest, but swung open. I stepped through, and for the first time, I was standing on my own land. Ms. Albright hadn't been exaggerating. It was rugged. The ground was a chaotic jumble of stone and thorny undergrowth, dotted with hardy, wind-stunted pine trees that clung to the earth with grim determination. The property sloped steeply upwards, culminating in a sheer, monumental wall of granite that soared hundreds of feet into the sky. It dominated everything, a silent, gray giant watching over the land. It was beautiful, and it was terrifying. I scrambled up the incline, my hands grabbing at roots and rocks for purchase. Near the base of the massive cliff, I found what I was looking for: the ruins of the cabin. It wasn't much, a blackened stone foundation choked with weeds. A few charred timbers lying in a heap, slowly rotting back into the earth. This was where he had lived. This was the home that had burned. I stood in the center of the foundation, trying to imagine it. A man living alone up here, for decades. Why? I walked the perimeter of the 5 acres, a slow, methodical circuit. The land was useless for farming, impossible for conventional building. On 3 sides, it bordered other undeveloped woods, presumably now owned by High Ridge Ventures. But the 4th side, the northern edge, was the cliff, the rock wall. It wasn't just a border, it was the entire character of the place. It was ancient and immovable. I put my hand against it. The stone was cool and rough, alive with lichen and moss. It felt like I was touching the very bones of the world. As the sun began to dip below the western peaks, casting long, dramatic shadows across the landscape, a profound sense of despair washed over me. What was I doing here? I was a kid with a useless degree and no practical skills. I couldn't live here. This wasn't a home, it was a wilderness. The $20,000 offer felt less like a choice and more like an inevitability. It was the only sane path forward. I would go back to town in the morning, sign the papers, and walk away from this strange, sad legacy. I decided to spend the night. I had a sleeping bag and a small tarp. It seemed right to spend at least one night on the land that was mine, if only for a few more hours. I cleared a small patch of ground inside the old foundation, the flattest spot I could find. As I was scraping away leaves and loose stones, my fingers hit something hard and flat. It wasn't a rock. It was metal. My heart skipped a beat. I dug around it with my hands, my nails filling with dirt. It was a metal box, an old military-style ammo can, rusted but still solid. It was heavy. It took all my strength to pry the latches open. They groaned in protest, flakes of rust falling away. I lifted the lid. Inside, protected by a sheet of oilcloth, was a stack of leather-bound journals, a bundle of letters tied with twine, and a heavy canvas bag. My hands were trembling as I opened the bag. It was full of cash, old bills neatly stacked and wrapped in paper bands. I counted it slowly, my mind numb. It was just over $10,000, enough to live on for months, enough to make a real choice. Beneath the money was another object, a small, handcrafted wooden bird, exquisitely carved. I recognized it instantly. I had one just like it, tucked away in my box of keepsakes. My mother had given it to me when I was a child. She said her father had made it for her. My grandfather, the man I thought had abandoned her. The last thing in the box was a single thick envelope with my name, Leo, written on the front in a shaky, spidery hand. I sat on the cold ground, the setting sun painting the sky in fiery shades of orange and purple, and I opened the letter. The letter wasn't a single page. It was a confession, a history, a plea. It was my grandfather's voice, reaching out from beyond the grave. "Leo," it began, "if you are reading this, it means I am gone, and the lawyers have found you. I am glad. I worried they would not. I worried this place and this story would die with me. I hope you will forgive an old man for the silence. It was a silence born not of indifference, but of a long and difficult fight." My hands shook as I read on. He explained everything. He hadn't abandoned his family. He'd left to find work in the mines out west, always sending money home. But there was an accident, a cave-in. He was badly injured, and the mining company, a predecessor to High Ridge Ventures, refused to pay. They blacklisted him. Broke and ashamed, unable to provide for his wife and child, he'd retreated into himself. He bought this small plot of land with his last few dollars, intending to build a home and send for them once he was on his feet. "But the world has a way of kicking a man when he's down," he wrote. "The company followed me. They wanted this land, not for what it was, but for what it was attached to. The water rights, the mineral rights hidden deep within that rock wall. They saw a future of luxury and profit, and I was just a stubborn old fool standing in their way. The cabin fire hadn't been an accident. It was arson. He'd barely escaped with his life. After that, he knew he couldn't bring his family here. It wasn't safe. He cut ties to protect them, watching from a distance as my mother grew up, got married, had me. He lived for years in a small trailer in town, working odd jobs, saving every penny, using his meager resources to file legal challenges, to create a paper trail of resistance against the developers. He became a ghost in his own life, all to keep this one small piece of the world from being swallowed by greed. "This land is not valuable in the way they think," the letter continued. "Its true value is not in the minerals or the water. Its value is that it is still wild, that it has not been tamed or sold. It is a place to stand your ground. I have held it for you, Leo. I couldn't give your mother the life she deserved, and I couldn't be the grandfather you deserved. All I have to give you is this rock, this dirt, and a choice." I had to stop reading. Tears were streaming down my face, hot against my cold skin. I cried for the grandfather I'd never known. I cried for the mother who had died, believing her father had abandoned her. I cried for the years of lonely struggle this man had endured, all for a principle. All for me. The $20,000 offer from High Ridge Ventures now felt like an insult. It was blood money. It was the price of his entire life's sacrifice. The letter concluded with a final, heartbreaking paragraph. "The money in the box is what I saved. It is not much, but it might be enough to give you a start. You can take it, and their money, and go build a life for yourself. There is no shame in that. You owe me nothing. But if you have even a sliver of my stubbornness in you, you can use it to stay, to make a stand. The choice is yours. It has always been yours. Your loving grandfather, Arthur." The sky was dark now, littered with a billion stars, more than I had ever seen in my life. The air was cold and clean. The silence was absolute. I was alone, sitting in the ruins of a burned-down cabin on a worthless piece of land, with a box of money and a ghost's final wish. And for the first time, I didn't feel lost. I felt found. I knew what I had to do. The choice wasn't a choice at all. It was a calling. I was going to stay. But how? I couldn't live in a sleeping bag forever. Winter was coming, and in the Rockies, winter was not a suggestion. It was a verdict. I needed shelter. I needed a home. Building a traditional cabin was out of the question. I had no skills, no lumber, and not enough money to hire a crew. The land was too steep, the ground too rocky. I spent the next day in a feverish state of planning, my mind racing. I went back to town and visited the bank. The safe deposit box contained more of my grandfather's journals, detailed records of his fight with High Ridge, copies of geological surveys, and a small, faded photograph of a young woman holding a baby. My grandmother holding my mother. That night, back on my land, I sat by a small fire, the journals spread around me. I was looking at the massive granite cliff face, the way it loomed over the property, a perfect vertical wall. An idea began to form, a wild and desperate spark. What if I didn't have to build 4 walls? What if I only had to build 3? I could use the cliff itself as the back wall of a structure. It would be a natural, indestructible foundation. It would cut my work and material costs almost in half. The next morning, I walked back to Ms. Albright's office. I looked different than I had 2 days ago. I was covered in dirt, my hair was a mess, but my eyes were clear. "I'm not selling," I said, before she could even speak. I pushed the High Ridge Ventures envelope back across her desk. She looked at me, then at the envelope, and a slow, genuine smile spread across her face. "I had a feeling you might say that," she said. "So, what's your plan, Leo? High Ridge won't give up. They'll wait you out. They'll assume you'll fold when the first snow falls." "I'm going to build a house," I said. She raised an eyebrow. "A house?" "Leo, a building permit for a new residence in this county is a nightmare of paperwork and inspections. It takes months, sometimes years. You don't have that kind of time." "It's not exactly a house," I said, pulling out a piece of paper on which I'd sketched a rough design. "It's a Quonset hut." She stared at my drawing. A Quonset hut. Those semicircular corrugated steel buildings, like a giant tin can cut in half. They were developed for the military, designed to be cheap, durable, and assembled quickly by unskilled labor. "I'll order a kit," I explained, my voice gaining confidence. "I can anchor it to a concrete slab and build it right up against the rock wall. The cliff will be the back of the house. It's technically an agricultural or storage structure. The permit process is faster, cheaper. It's a loophole." Ms. Albright looked at my sketch, then back at me. She was quiet for a long time. I could see the gears turning in her mind, the lawyerly part of her brain assessing risks and probabilities. "It's audacious," she said finally. "It's borderline insane. The county inspector will have a fit." She paused, tapping a pen on her desk. "But it's not illegal, and it just might work." That was all I needed to hear. The next few weeks were a blur of frantic activity. I used a portion of my grandfather's money to order the Quonset hut kit. It was a huge gamble. It took almost everything I had left. While I waited for it to be delivered, I started the real work. I had to clear and level a patch of ground at the base of the cliff. The site was on a slope, covered in rocks and roots. I had a shovel, a pickaxe, and a wheelbarrow I'd bought at the town hardware store. That was it. Every morning, I would wake up with the sun, my body aching in places I didn't know could ache. I would spend 10, 12 hours digging, hauling rock, and slowly, inch by inch, carving a flat, level pad out of the mountainside. The physical labor was brutal. My hands were a mess of blisters that turned into calluses. My back was a constant, dull fire. Some days, the sheer scale of the task felt impossible. I would sit on a rock, gasping for breath, and look at the tiny amount of progress I had made. Despair would whisper at the edges of my mind. It told me I was a fool. It told me to give up, to take the money, to run. But then I would look at the cliff face, my grandfather's silent partner. I would touch the cold stone and remember his letter. A place to stand your ground. And I would pick up the shovel and dig again. The work was meditative. As I moved rocks and dirt, I felt like I was unearthing more than just soil. I was digging through my own grief, my own self-doubt. With every swing of the pickaxe, I was breaking down the person I used to be, the lost, scared kid in the dorm room, and building someone new, someone stronger, someone who belonged here. The locals in Stone Creek started to notice me. I'd go into the general store for supplies, covered in grime, and the owner, a gruff man named Bill, would give me a long, searching look. At first, they were suspicious. I was an outsider, another city kid playing at being a mountain man. But as the days turned into weeks, their suspicion turned into a kind of grudging respect. They saw my beat-up truck, loaded with bags of concrete mix. They saw the raw state of my hands when I paid for my groceries. One afternoon, as I was struggling to load a stack of lumber, Bill came out from behind the counter. He was a big man, with a belly that strained the buttons of his flannel shirt. "You're Arthur's grandson, aren't you?" he asked. His voice was a low rumble. I nodded, catching my breath. "Heard you're building something up on that rock pile. Refused to sell." "That's the plan," I said. He grunted. "Arthur was a stubborn old goat, but he was one of us." He grabbed the end of the lumber and helped me lift it onto the truck. "You need a hand with anything, you ask. Don't be proud." It was a small gesture, but it felt monumental. It was the first crack in the wall of my isolation. I wasn't just a stranger anymore. I was Arthur's grandson. This is a good time to pause. If you've ever felt like an outsider, and then someone offered you a small kindness that changed everything, let me know in the comments. This community is for people who understand that sometimes the smallest gesture of support can feel like a lifeline. Your stories matter. I want to read them. And if this is hitting home, make sure you're subscribed, because the hardest part of the build was still to come. Now, let's get back to the story. The Quonset hut kit arrived on a massive flatbed truck that could barely make the turns on the logging road. The driver, a guy with a cynical smirk, looked at the steep, muddy track leading to my building site and laughed. "You want this up there?" he asked, hooking a thumb toward the cliff. "Good luck." He dropped the entire pallet of curved steel panels and bundled struts at the gate. It was up to me to get it the final quarter-mile up the mountain. For 2 days, I hauled every single piece, one by one, in my wheelbarrow. Each panel was heavy and awkward. The work was soul-crushing. On the evening of the second day, as I was hauling the very last panel, my body screaming in protest, I saw headlights at the gate. It was Bill from the general store, and with him were 2 other men I recognized from town. They weren't smiling. They just got out of the truck, looked at the pile of steel, looked at me, and started picking up panels. No one said a word for almost an hour. We just worked, a silent team, moving the mountain of metal from the gate to the building site. When we were done, Bill clapped me on the shoulder, his hand like a slab of granite. "Concrete gets poured Saturday," he said. It wasn't a question. "I'll bring the mixer. You have the forms ready." And then they were gone. I stood there in the twilight, surrounded by the components of my future home, and I felt a warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the physical exertion. It was community. It was the beginning of belonging. Building the forms for the concrete slab was a lesson in geometry I'd never learned in a classroom. I had to get it perfectly level, perfectly square. I spent hours with a tape measure, a level, and string, my brain aching as much as my back. On Saturday, as promised, Bill arrived with a portable cement mixer rattling in the bed of his truck. The other two men, a carpenter named Sal and a rancher named Dave, were with him. For the entire day, we mixed and poured concrete, shoveling and smoothing it under the hot sun. They showed me how to screed the surface, how to finish it with a trowel. They worked with an easy, practiced efficiency, ribbing me for my clumsiness, but always correcting me gently. "You're thinking too much, kid," Sal said, taking the trowel from my hand. "Feel it. The concrete will tell you what it needs." By the end of the day, we had a perfect 30 by 40-foot slab of concrete curing at the base of the rock wall. It was the foundation of my house, but it felt like more than that. It was a testament to unexpected kindness. As they were packing up, I tried to thank them, fumbling for words. Bill just waved a dismissive hand. "Arthur would have done the same," he said. "High Ridge has been bullying this valley for too long. It's about time someone pushed back." The next phase was assembling the arches. This was the part I'd been dreading. According to the manual, it was a two-man job. I was one man. I spent a frustrating day trying to bolt the curved panels together, wrestling with the heavy, floppy steel. It was impossible. The arch would collapse under its own weight before I could get it secured. I was sitting in the dirt, defeated, when Sal's truck appeared on the road. He didn't say anything. He just got out, grabbed a wrench, and said, "Let's get to work." For the next week, he showed up every single day after he finished his own jobs. We developed a rhythm, a non-verbal communication of grunts and nods. We'd assemble an arch on the ground, then, with ropes and sheer muscle, we would walk it upright and bolt it to the anchors I'd set in the concrete. One by one, the silver ribs of my house rose against the gray granite of the cliff. It began to take shape, looking like the skeleton of some great metallic beast. With the arches in place, we started attaching the side panels. The structure grew, enclosed itself. The final step was building the two end walls. The kit came with steel end walls, but I wanted something different. I wanted windows. I wanted a door. I used the last of my grandfather's money to buy lumber and prefabricated windows. Sal, the carpenter, took over. He framed the front wall with an expert speed, showing me how to measure, cut, and nail. He taught me how to frame a window opening, how to hang a door. We used translucent polycarbonate panels for the upper half of the front wall, letting in a flood of natural light. When we were done, it was no longer just a metal shed. The wooden front, with its door and its windows, gave it a face. It had a personality. It looked like a home. The day we finished, Sal and I stood back and looked at it. The silver curve of the roof flowed directly into the massive, ancient rock face behind it. The warm wood of the front wall contrasted with the cold steel of the arches. It was strange, and it was beautiful. It looked like it had grown there. "Well, kid," Sal said, wiping his hands on his jeans, "you did it." I had. I had a home. It was an empty shell with a concrete floor and no plumbing or electricity, but it was mine. I had built it with my own two hands and with the help of men who owed me nothing. That winter was the hardest and most beautiful of my life. I moved in with my sleeping bag, a camp stove, and a few lanterns. I bought a small wood-burning stove and installed it myself, the pipe running up and out through the steel wall. That stove became the heart of my home. I spent my days cutting firewood and my nights reading my grandfather's journals by the flickering light of the flames. The cold was a constant presence. Snow piled up in deep drifts outside. The wind howled, a lonely sound against the metal roof. But inside, I was warm. I was safe. The Quonset was more than just a shelter. It became my sanctuary. The rear wall, the cliff face itself, was the most incredible feature. I left it exposed, a raw, textured surface of granite inside my living space. In the morning, the light from the front windows would catch the crystals in the rock, making it sparkle. It was like living inside a geode. I was living in the embrace of the mountain. I learned the rhythms of the wilderness. I learned to identify the tracks of deer and foxes in the snow. I learned the language of the wind, the different sounds it made as it moved through the pines. The solitude didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like peace. I had a purpose. My purpose was to survive, to endure, to honor the legacy that had been left to me. Ms. Albright called me once a month. "Just checking in," she'd say. "High Ridge has been quiet, too quiet. They're waiting for you to break." "I'm not going to break," I'd tell her, and my voice was steady and strong. I believed it. One day, a county inspector did show up, a man with a clipboard and a sour expression. He'd heard about my unconventional structure. He walked around it, tapping on the walls, looking for violations. He saw the agricultural permit I had taped to the window. He saw the wood stove, properly installed and vented. He saw the solid concrete foundation. He couldn't find a single thing wrong. "It's a barn," I said, my face a neutral mask. "For storage." He grunted. "Looks like you're living in this barn." "I sleep here sometimes," I said, "to guard my agricultural equipment," which consisted of one shovel and a wheelbarrow. He knew I was lying. I knew he knew, but there was nothing he could do. The structure was sound. The paperwork was in order. He got back in his truck and drove away, defeated. It was a small victory, but it felt huge. I had beaten the system, using its own rules. As the snow began to melt and spring returned to the mountains, something shifted. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. I built a small kitchen counter along one wall. I ran a pipe from a nearby spring, using a simple hand pump for water. It wasn't fancy, but it was functional. I started to think about the future, not as a threat, but as a possibility. I read through my grandfather's geological surveys. He had been right. The land was rich in certain rare earth minerals. Not enough for a massive mining operation, but perhaps enough for a small, sustainable one. He had also marked several sources of pure spring water. High Ridge didn't just want the land for a resort. They wanted to bottle the water. His journals were a roadmap, a business plan he never got to execute. I realized what he had left me wasn't just a piece of land to protect. He had left me an opportunity, a chance to build something that would not only sustain me, but would honor his vision. A small, ethical business that worked with the land, not against it. My philosophy degree, which had seemed so useless, suddenly found a purpose. I started reading about environmental ethics, sustainable business models, land trusts. I was formulating a new plan, one that went beyond just defiance. It was a plan for creation. The home I had built was the first step. It was my foothold, my fortress. It had saved me from homelessness, from despair. But its true purpose was to be the foundation for whatever came next. It had kept me alive, so that I could learn how to truly live. One sunny afternoon in May, a sleek black SUV I didn't recognize drove up the logging road and stopped at my gate. A man in an expensive suit got out. He was tan and wore sunglasses I couldn't afford. He represented High Ridge Ventures. He didn't bother with pleasantries. He had a new offer. $50,000. "Take it, kid," he said, his voice smooth and condescending. "Go back to the city. Buy a condo. This little fantasy of yours is over." I looked at him. I looked at the home I had built with my own hands. I looked at the mountain that had become my partner. I thought of my grandfather. I thought of Bill and Sal and Dave. I just smiled. "This land isn't for sale," I said. And for the first time in my life, I felt rich. The man in the suit just stared at me, his mask of corporate confidence slipping for just a second. He saw something in my eyes he didn't expect. He saw someone who wasn't scared, someone who was home. He got back in his car and drove away, kicking up a cloud of dust. I knew it wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a different kind of fight. But I was ready. I had my fortress. I had my allies. I had my grandfather's story. And I had a future to build. That Quonset hut, that half-circle of steel pressed against a rock wall, it looked like a scar on the landscape to some. But to me, it was a symbol of resilience. It was proof that you can build a home out of the most impossible materials, in the most impossible places. It was proof that inheritance isn't about money. It's about the stories we carry and the ground we refuse to give up. It's about choosing the harder right over the easier wrong. That structure didn't just keep me alive through a cold winter. It taught me who I was, and it gave me a place to become the person I was always meant to be. Looking back, the most important thing I built wasn't the house itself. It was the connection. Connection to a grandfather I'd never met, to a community that took me in, and to a piece of earth that I now called home. It was the realization that home isn't just a place you inherit. It's a place you create, a place you defend, a place you earn. So I want to ask you, what does home mean to you? Is it a building, a person, a memory, a feeling? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's talk about what it means to find our place in the world, even when we have to build it from scratch. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, please consider subscribing. We're building a community here for people who aren't afraid of the hard fights, the long roads, and the work it takes to build a life of meaning. You are not alone on your journey. We're all in this together.